the elites don't believe in Britain. In my case, they don't believe in Australia. In America, they don't believe in America. They don't believe in the West. But my more pointed issue here is they don't believe in Britain, whereas many Britons want to believe in Britain. It raises the question, doesn't it, of nationalism. And is there a place for a sound nationalism, or is it always a dirty word? Because one group would have you believe it's a dirty word, and only racists and narrow-minded bigots and people who are locked in the past and have never explored the world could believe in Britain, stroke Australia, stroke America, whatever. Whereas people who live in those places often have a deep attachment to country and can see that it can be valuable.
Well, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I've just been revisiting some of the work of Daniel Bell, a very prominent American academic who wrote a number of great books in the post-war period, and one of those was The Cultural Contradictions of Capitalism in the early 1970s. And what Bell pointed out even then was the rise of what he called a new adversary class, essentially the way in which the elite were changing. And he noticed that they were deriving their status increasingly not by being proud members of the national community, but essentially by disparaging and denigrating the national community in order to win status and esteem and honor from other members of the elite. And this really was the foundation of much of the work that followed. Think about the work of Christopher Lasch in the US in the early 1990s. Think about the work of David Goodhart, his discussion of anywheres and somewheres. Think about David Brooks, his discussion of the bourgeoisie bohemians. And I think what's happened today, lots of people ask me, what's the difference between the new elite and the old elite? Well, one of the key differences, I think, is that the old elite in Britain, the old money Tory elite, were always disconnected from the rest of the country. They were economically disconnected. They were insular. I mean, there was an old boys club. Henry Fairley, the journalist, first term, used the term the establishment in 1955. But when it came to culture, when it came to the nation, when it came to institutions, they respected them and they supported them. And that included the old left, by the way. It included the Clement Attlees. It included the Peter Shaws. It included the Tony Benns. The old left socialists we would go back now and read their speeches and consider them to be nationalist in the way that they talked about empire, in the way that they talked about the need for Britain to avoid integration with Europe, the defense of 1,000 years of history and of a long tradition of continuity in our democracy. What's happened today, however, is whereas the old elite derive their status more from money and property and titles, the new elite increasingly derive their status by embracing radical progressivism, by critiquing, dismissing, undermining, laughing at the nation, at identity, at history, at culture. And they're simultaneously doing that while repackaging Britishness and Englishness around these notions of diversity, of universal liberalism, of multiculturalism. So they're redefining the national project around an international theme, which chimes with their values, at the same time denigrating that national community, which is leaving many people who do view that as a critical source of status and esteem, feeling as though they're not being taken seriously at all. And I think if you look at the new elite in Britain, America, and elsewhere, I think, I talk about this in the book, but what we're seeing is the rise of what some academics have called asymmetrical multiculturalism, whereby in the world of the new elite, you can celebrate every identity, every history, every culture around the world, so long as it is not your own. And when it comes to Britishness and Englishness, you must be instinctively skeptical. You must be, in some cases, openly hostile, and you must repackage those national identities around these universal themes. And many voters find this incredibly difficult to digest and deal with, because, John, to say that a country is welcoming of diversity is fine, but that cannot be the basis of an entire national identity, because it's like saying you don't have an identity of your own. And for many Brits and Australians and Americans, they are fiercely proud of their distinctive identity, their distinctive history, their distinctive culture, their distinctive ways of life, and they feel that those things are being rapidly eroded by globalization and by a distant elite, which is why these populist politicians and others are still as strong as they've ever been, because they are tapping into this growing sense of frustration with this new ruling class.